Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I have your host, as usual, Liam, or at the FSA Tweets on Twitter. And as I said, as usual, there's nothing different about this podcast. I'm joined by Rich at Dynasty Island on Twitter. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm very good, although I've just had my phone buzz to say that England are already 1-0 down in the football. So, let's hope the evening goes better than that.
And you may have heard him laugh in the background there. He is one of the 5 Yard Dynasty writers that we have. Emerson, or at Dynasty_analyst on Twitter. Emerson, how are you doing, buddy? It's your podcast debut, I believe.
Yeah, I did a little mock draft with you guys, and I did a little couple, 30-second little blurbs here and there. But this is my first full podcast. But I've been with you guys since February, so about time I dabbled into the pool a little bit.
That was no mock draft, mate. That was the 5 Yard Dynasty rookie draft, and you had more than 30 seconds. You had like 7 picks in the top 20.
I guess I'm misremembering. You're right. It was the Dynasty draft, and I did have like every pick in the first and second round, so I did get a little. I got a chance to talk for sure. That was nice. That was fun.
It's good to have you. And I have to say, Emerson, since you joined us, I've been jealous of your Twitter handle since the first time we spoke. It's a very impressive one. I'm not quite sure how you managed to pull it off.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked it was still there, honestly. But you know what? There is, hopefully it doesn't come back from the dead. There is a Dynasty analyst without the underscore, but he hasn't tweeted in a couple of years. We'll see if he comes back.
What's the rules on that? Do you get to submit an application for the Twitter handle to Twitter to see if you can steal it back?
If I ever hit it big, he's going to come after me for copyright. If I ever hit it big, oh man.
Anyway, for the episode this week, we have got Emerson to join us to talk about some dynasty preparation and startup strategy. So this episode is going to be more based around the preparation you do before going into a startup draft rather than the strategy behind that. But if we do have time, we will go into the strategy side. So Emerson, let's dive right in. And when you're heading into a dynasty startup, just take us through what your process is. What do you get your rankings ready? Do you just go into it using whatever platforms, ADP? Take us through your step-by-step preparation guide, I suppose.
Well, it depends a little bit if it's a fast or if it's a slow draft. If it's a slow draft, I might not need a sheet. I might use the ADP. You can scan through it. You can take your time. But especially if it's a fast draft, it's definitely important. I like to get a sheet out in front of me, kind of get my own rankings out in front of me. Put it in tiers so you see, which players are moving quicker, maybe which position's drying up the quickest. And especially if you're not, especially if you're brand new, I would definitely get plugged into the pot, all the new content being put out, all the latest summer news and everything, listen to some podcasts, definitely read some content, particularly from 5 Yard Rush. But if it's a fast draft, I definitely want to be more organized because you're not going to have as much time to think though. So I definitely put a little more effort into getting at least some tiers in front of me and some rankings just so I can see mainly which positions are drying up quick if I need to draft somebody.
I'm intrigued that I don't think I've ever done a fast dynasty startup. So how fast are your fast dynasty startups that you do?
I've only done a couple, but I see people doing them, so I wanted to talk about it. But I always personally I draft the best player available, at least according to me, and I might start off with 12 wide receivers, or if it's super flex, maybe 7 quarterbacks to start off with. But just depends on the draft.
Man after my own heart.
So you mentioned about fast and slow drafts, but you never mentioned anything about auction, and auction is my new fad at the moment. I started it last year, And this year I've been trying to do as much auction as possible. Do you do auction drafts, or are you strictly down to snake and linear style drafts?
I've done a couple, and it definitely requires definitely a different. It's just like I would say the same thing for what I was talking about, the quick draft. You're definitely going to get some rankings in front of you, some tiers. Definitely have some. I like to also go through and, the ADPs for every website are a little flawed. I like to go through and maybe highlight some guys that, maybe that are ranked a little too low, and just be ready to snag them early so I can get them on my team, maybe at a good price. But yeah, that's the same thing with an auction, just getting really prepared for it. And we could dive into different auction strategies and talk about that on a whole different show too. But so I'm not super experienced, but I'm trying, every single new league I get into, I'm trying to make it an auction.
Man after my own heart, Rich.
Absolutely. I love auctions. I think it's been fantastic since Sleeper have added it. I think I'm probably going to upset a few people here, but I describe a snake draft as checkers and auction draft as chess. I think it's a far better way to do a startup, and I think it requires an awful lot more preparation. I think it requires an awful lot more thought, but I think it's far superior once you're in it. I have to say, I've never known, except maybe Ali from the Dynasty Wildcard, I've never known anyone who doesn't like an auction. I think it's far superior.
Oh yeah,
we may need to.
You get access to everybody, so that's nice.
So, Rich, what do you do for your preparation? Because we've heard it from Emerson, and I know that you're Mr. Preparation over there. We're doing a salary cap blind auction league at the moment, and I've never known someone so prepared for something that I think everyone in the league has very little experience about.
Yeah, I guess it's old school scout in me, perhaps, although I don't think I did anything higher than Beavers, so maybe not quite that much. But yeah, was it fail to prepare to fail, or something like that? So yeah, I'm obsessed with preparation. Luckily, I update my rankings. I've got my values. I'm pretty set there from that perspective. But I do like to do a couple of other bits and pieces before we get going in a startup. So what I'll do is I will basically research every single person that I'm in the league with. So I will find out what they are on Sleeper. I'll find them if I don't already have them on Twitter. I'll find out what team they support. I'll scroll through their Twitter page to see if there's any players that they're particularly in love with, or any players that they particularly hate. I think it's really important when if you're at one of the ends, either end of the draft, if you're picking 101, the guy picking 102, if you know that it's coming up to a turn and he hates a player, you can risk letting him fall and take him, at a later pick or something like that, because you know that he's not going to touch him. So I think that's certainly something that I try to do. I try to research every single person that I'm in a league with. But I think it's really important that you start kind of conversations with people you're in a league with before the startup, because I think that it sounds ridiculous, but everybody likes to trade, but people only trade with people that I find that there's already an open dialogue with. I think it's difficult to approach somebody that you've never been in a league with, that you've got no interaction with, and basically say, right, here's a trade we're going to do. So I try and open some dialogue with people. I think it sounds really bad, but you could also get quite a quick feel for the level of knowledge of people in a conversation quite quickly. I think if you are having a chat and realize that, this is their first Dynasty league, or, they're a bit clueless, then it sounds awful, but, you can start to take advantage of them. And
you horrible person.
Well, look, if it's a cash league,
this is
it's fair game. If it's a cash league, it's fair game. People are entering in. If they're gonna step into a cash league without having a clue what's going on, then you're there. You need to know your stuff. So yeah, I try to know everybody that I'm in a draft with, and also again, if they're reliant on certain analysts. If they're, you can get this from Twitter feed really easy. It's rubbish, isn't it, that we're all putting everything out in public? But if somebody is constantly commenting or retweeting a particular analyst that has rankings out in public, chances are they're probably going to be drafting off their rankings, something like that. I also find it quite interesting because there's been a few times where, particularly recently, I've been drafting with either my patrons or people that have got access to my rankings, which is quite fun because I can then sort of try to play them against my own rankings and stuff like that. So I think it's really important that you know who you're drafting with and get to know them as much as possible.
Now this whole thing makes sense.
Got the James Dynasty takes. I like it.
Sounds good to me.
This whole thing makes sense. So a few months ago, Rich sent a tweet out saying, "I don't understand people that have different sleeper usernames to their Twitter handles." Now I know why he wants everyone to have the same, so we can go.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work trying to work out who people are on Twitter if they've got a different sleeper handle. It makes my life so much easier.
I'm one of those guys. I have a different sleeper handle.
I know, and it confused the hell out of me when we were first in our Dynasty League, Emerson. I was like, who the hell's this Johnny Cocktail?
That's funny. I got the same thing. I joined another analyst league, and everyone was like, who's Johnny Cocktail?
So a couple of comments we've had while we were talking there. So, hi, Stacey. Then Paul has got a comment for you, Rich. So you researched me and fell in love. Do you want to rebuttal that, Rich, or are you going to admit your love to Paul over the?
No, I can declare my love for Paul. I think his fandom is shocking, but he makes it very easy for me. Every draft I've ever been in with Paul, he's reached at some point for a Cardinals. So that's the perfect example of a guy that I know he loves Cardinals, so he's reaching on them.
Right, let's stop slating some other 5 Yard Dynasty writers, Rich, and let's keep interviewing Emerson here. So, Emerson, you mentioned your rankings and you mentioned finding ADP from other websites. Do you look at tiers or ranks specifically? I know you also mentioned tiers. So, what's your process behind that? Because I know Rich has rankings and I have rankings, but I don't know about you, Rich. I believe you're on the same path as me, that I prefer tiers. I just have rankings to really have a step between one or the other. But I tend to have guys in tiers where I'm not too bothered about which one I get around a certain pick. Are you in a similar boat to us there, Emerson?
Yeah, like I said, I tend, tiers are kind of for if you're trying to, make sure that you kind of get a certain position, before it dries up and things like that. If you see a big drop off in running backs, you might snag and reach a little running back early. I'm a really active trader, so I don't tend to. Like I said, I draft the best player available. So I like to give advice to everybody. Not everybody's a trade machine. Not everybody's sending out offers every week in Dynasty leagues. So if you're not extremely active, you might definitely want to maybe use tiers more because this, what you draft now is pretty much maybe going to be your team when in September. Me, I'm fine starting off with 8 wide receivers and then, and then diversifying after that. So it just depends, I guess know who you are. If you're not an active trader, you might want to plan more accordingly for your lineups and stuff. But that's where I find position like tiers a little bit more important.
Rich, you were nodding all the way through me talking about tiers. So you use tiers by the looks of it. But how do you use those tiers to your advantage?
So for me, I think I kind of take it perhaps one step further in that where I've got my trade value chart and I assign every player a value, and that allows me to see perhaps the tiers a little bit more clearly, because whilst, yes, tier 3 and tier 4 are different, I think by giving each player a value, it allows me to determine how big a drop there is at certain positions, at certain players, so that it's almost quantifying what the value drop is at certain positions. And that allows me to move around the draft board, particularly in Dynasty Startup, where I can trade up, trade down and kind of make those moves to where I see the value. Obviously, that's not exactly an easy process to go through and assign every player a value. I appreciate that's quite a detailed process, but I certainly think that if it's difficult to just draft off rankings, because as soon as players start getting pulled out, if you're deleting players as they go, the difference between player 1 and player 2 could be absolutely massive. But on the piece of paper you're looking at, or on the sleeper queue list or whatever, it's the difference is 1 player. So I think that, everybody has a different way of tiering players and creating a tiered system. But I think that's important. Off the back of kind of rankings and tiers, Emerson. So I think we talked a little bit about this kind of offline, and it's something that I've been toying with over the past year or so. And it's something that I find myself doing more and more in kind of redraft rather than dynasty startups. But have you ever toyed with the idea of a vertical draft board and a horizontal draft board and what you're drafting off? And what I mean by that is a vertical draft board is basically all your players, call it a top 200 or something like that. So that's players 1 to 200, regardless of position ranked. Whereas a horizontal draft board is basically position rankings.
I tend, in that sense, like I said, I tend to use a more vertical draft board because I tend to draft the best player available. And that's according to my own rankings. And each person, as you're going into a draft, you're looking at podcasts. You need to develop your own kind of rankings, based on who you trust and who you like. But like I said, so I definitely probably use a more vertical approach, and I'm fine. Whoever I personally identify as the best player, I'll take that player. So I tend to lean probably a more vertical approach, I would say.
Yeah, I think, again, this comes back to the value piece in that I utilize the horizontal board more, and I certainly in redraft, because I think we're slightly more positional driven in redraft rather than leaning towards that best player available. But I think for me, I like the horizontal board with my values because it allows me to see. I can almost create a vertical board from the horizontal board quite quickly as I'm looking at it. But it allows me to see where the value drop-offs are significantly at positions. And whilst I completely agree with Emerson, I'm always best player available and I'll always take the best value. I think that the best value in a draft is sometimes slightly different to what the best value is in a vacuum. And I think that, every draft is a unique situation. And that if you are in a draft and you're looking at it going, nobody is valuing these, whatever position, let's say running backs at all, they're just falling down the draft board, I'm going to end up drafting 8 running backs to start my draft. This is ridiculous value. But the truth is that, yes, that is ridiculous value in a vacuum, but the other, say, 11 people in your league haven't valued those players and those positions in the startup. So chances are they're probably not going to value them after the startup. So whilst you're sitting there thinking, this is incredible value, I've got all these guys, they've fallen in that draft for a reason because nobody else in the league values them. And I think that has helped me to identify where there's kind of the unique twists in draft value per startup, rather than just, right, this is the list of players and I'm just going to take the player from the top of that board every single time I'm on the clock as such. What about you, Liam? Are you a vertical drafter? Are you a horizontal drafter? Or?
I feel like I'm a little bit in between, and I know when I first came on the pod, you were on me all the time about being on the fence. And I promise you that this isn't me being on the fence, but I have my vertical rankings at all times, but I will always look at how the board has fallen. I think this comes back to something that I've always spoken about, is be flexible with your draft, understand how the draft is playing out. Because if, for example, the wide receivers are falling a little bit more than you would expect, as Rich said, that means that the startup isn't valuing them at where you value them. So you could get them a little bit later. Now, that means that vertical rankings in that sense don't work to your full advantage, and that's where you should always be looking at trying to get that advantage toward yourself and not giving it to your league mates. Hence why Rich preys on the unexperienced by the sounds of it. But
I feel like I'm going to get a reputation for bullying like newcomers. I am very much welcoming to anyone in a dynasty startup. I create lots of leagues designed for new starters. We've done that over the years. I'm very much that. I'm talking purely in a cash league, because I think if you're in a cash league, there is a different level of expectation. And I think that to a certain level, kind of anything is fair game within the rules in a cash league, because I think, at the end of the day, we're all there to have fun, but we're there to earn some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm only trying to play you, Rich. I'm not, but you are trying to prey on the weak. But yeah, I always want to try and use a vertical draft board where possible, but I'm not shoehorned into using that pre-draft. I never shoehorned into a specific strategy, even though I'll do my prep before the draft. I will always be flexible within it. But I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is a lot of people go into a draft and will think, okay, I've got to take best player available, or I've got to have 2 running backs by the end of the first 4 rounds or something along those lines, and they're not flexible to move out of it if the board doesn't drop to you, and that's where a lot of people lose value. Can
I dive in and ask? I appreciate, Liam, I'm jumping off the show sheet, which gives you hives and causes you to have heart palpitations, but I just wanted to add the next question. Do you think, Emerson, when you're drafting, do you draft purely off your rankings? Are you paying attention to ADP? Are you like utilizing both, or are you strictly one or the other as such?
I use both, because whatever website you use is really going to dictate how the draft goes. The ADP on that website, for a lot of people, that they're going to scroll through the first 12 names on the list, and they're going to pick their favorite guy, probably within the first 5 or 6 guys. So I definitely want to look at that ADP. Even if I might value Devontae Smith way higher than everyone else right now. Huge buy, by the way. But I'm not going to draft him in round 5 or 6, even though I might think he's there right now, because he's the wide receiver. I think 27 on left right now, I think I saw. So I might wait a little bit on him, even though I might have him ranked maybe 20 spots higher than ADP. I'm still going to wait just an extra maybe round. I want to make sure I get him, but I might wait an extra round just to make sure I'm not overpaying when I don't need to.
Sorry, Emerson, I wasn't shaking my head at you for audio listeners. I started shaking my head halfway through Emerson talking, and it was because Rich has put a comment that was defending his honor on screen, and it wasn't me. Just going to point that out.
If people want to jump to my defence and say that I'm a very gracious commissioner, then by all means. I would like to point out this isn't me. I appreciate it doesn't have a name. It wasn't me just jumping on Facebook.
Didn't have a team, he said. That doesn't count.
It was a league for the listeners. As I said, trying to bring new people into Dynasty, and we ended up with 12 people rather than 11, so I graciously bowed out and didn't have a team.
What something that you need to mention, Rich, is you mentioned your trade values, your rankings, etc., but you've not told the listeners where to find them, and they're in your Dynasty Survival Kit. But I've just looked on Twitter and it's no longer your pinned post. So where can the listeners go find it?
It's my Dynasty Survival Kit. If you're interested, drop me a DM. I can share a link with you, or it is in my Patreon, which you can sign up for on my pinned tweet.
Perfect. I had to make sure you dropped that in there because you wouldn't have done it yourself.
I appreciate it.
So, Emerson, when you're heading into a draft, are there any specific strategies that you prefer? Any like small tactics that you like to do? So like Rich mentioned earlier, if he knows a certain person doesn't like a certain person on the turn doesn't like a specific player or a specific team and won't take them? Do you let a player fall hoping that they'll come back on the other side of the turn? Or is there a specific strategy you prefer? So like in Dynasty, do you prefer zero running back or hero running back, or do you take quarterbacks early? What just answer that question as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I like to do, I won't maybe necessarily do it if I can lock in one of the top three. If it's a super flex draft and it's Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, I'm going to be really hesitant to move that pick. But especially if I don't have one of those guys, I'm looking to maybe move my first round pick and maybe my second round pick too. I like to really collect a lot of picks between that third and sixth round range. That's when I get some of my favorite teams, honestly. And I've had drafts when I'm able to get maybe 8-9 picks between rounds 3 and 6, and in a super flex draft, you're still getting really, really good wide receivers all through that range and high end running backs. And I find that that's a great strategy. Of course, one of my go-tos is I never draft. You're never going to see me spend an early pick on a 26-year-old running back or older. I'm never going to I gave away that tip. That was one of my tips for the end. Darn it. All right. Well, yeah. So I definitely go to a draft. That's not something I'm usually going to come off of. You're never going to see me draft Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey or Austin Eckler, in the top 5 rounds. I usually won't start reaching for some of those higher end veterans till around 9 or 10. Those 29-year-old wide receivers, those 26-year-old, 27-year-old running backs. That's me. I'm a little bit of an ageist in dynasty leagues, but.
Do you think it's interesting hearing what you're saying, Emerson? Because I think that's kind of a lot of people's thoughts is trade back as much as possible, recoup as much value and as many picks as you can in those 3 to 6 range, as you mentioned, and really target those young wide receivers in leagues. Do you think that with that becoming more and more kind of, I guess, consensus in terms of how to approach a dynasty startup, do you think we're getting to a point where there could be some great value doing the opposite of that and, potentially trading up and getting a couple of higher price picks and that's that approach rather than trading back that certainly in startups I've been, everybody seems to want to do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I should have gave that caveat. It is sometimes harder and harder to do now, but, it's still tough. I never like the depth I have when I do a lot of moving up. I don't like usually my teams as much. I know it's hard for me to execute a trade for me personally moving up in a draft. But if I can throw, except for maybe if I'm using future picks, I do like, if I can get a top 5 round pick and give up a double, 11th, 10th, and 9th round pick and a 20, maybe not next year. Next year's a special class, but usually I'm exploring that first round pick, seeing if I can get a top 4 or 5 round pick. But usually I think that people are looking for a little too bit much. So I'm still trying to move down. I've stayed put a lot more recently too, just because, like you said, every single person's looking to move down and they'll sit on the clock for 6 hours waiting too.
Yeah, I think that certainly I'm not there yet where I'm at a position where I'm looking to move up, particularly in those early rounds. I think, as you said, the value is still to move back. But I do think that it's certainly a situation to monitor, maybe not this off-season, but maybe in next off-season if, we've got 3 years of people wanting to move back and buy those young receivers. I do wonder if there could be a move to go up early and take a kind of stars and scrubs approach. It's certainly something that I'm monitoring because I think the value of trade backs has dropped in the last 12 months. So I'm keen to see if, a year ago you could trade your first round pick and get a second and a third for your first and like a 9th. Whereas now it's like first for second and a 4th. And I just think that value seems to be dropping significantly. So I'm certainly monitoring it because I think it still needs to drop a bit further before I'm ready to jump up.
I'm sure we were talking about this time last off-season, Rich, talking about the value might be the other way around. What I found this season especially is that even though a lot of people are looking to move back, they're not necessarily willing to give up the value that you need to move up yourself. And I think that's where the disconnect comes in. Even though everyone is looking to move back, I still think that price is a little bit too high to move up. But Emerson, you said you're a massive trader in all of your leagues. You're very active. This is something that I think a lot of people shy away from. But once a player is picked, say if you think that they went too late or something, do you ever inquire about that player even though they've just been picked? I've done it a few times and I've found a few deals, but I think a lot of people, once a player is picked, just think, okay, they're off my board, I'll never ever get them again. Do you ever inquire at that point? Because I'm starting to see a little bit of wiggle room where someone might not have been overly confident in making that pick, and you can try and like squeeze them away for less than what you would have had to pay for trading up.
You know, that's a nice, you know, I take, you know, I'm in a lot of dynasty leagues. I take a patient approach. You know, if my guy gets picked, you know, I'll think, you know, I'll get this, I'll get back to him later, you know, so I'll always come back around later. So it might not be immediately, but you know what I mean? If somebody gets picked, that's not the end all for me. I'm not giving up on it. You know, like I said, I might shoot an offer out, you know, right then, you know, or, you know, I might approach them later. So like I said, I'm always moving around. So it's very rare that the team that I'm drafting right now is going, you know, I'm probably changing at least 50 to 60% of my starting lineup between now and August. So that's usually at least how I go.
That's a really interesting question, Liam, because it's certainly not something that I've ever done. And I have to say, if someone approached me about a player I've just drafted wanting to buy him, my immediate response would be, yeah, I'll sell him for more than I've just paid for. Do you find that you get some deals that way, or?
I've found that I've got it a few times now. I've definitely found it more this season than I have last season. It tends to be more when someone has been looking for a trade back pre-pick, hasn't found the deal that they wanted, and then selected a player because they must have been in the middle of 2 or 3 players that they wanted to get back from, or thought that they could get later on, and having to not necessarily reach, but maybe not 100% certain with that pick, so trying to recoup a bit more value. And yes, you are probably giving up a little bit more than what the pick was originally worth, but necessarily it doesn't mean that that's what the original offer was. I found a lot of times where someone has offered or someone has traded back out of that pick that they've just made because they didn't necessarily want one of those two, but they probably wouldn't have taken the deal that I sent them if they hadn't made that pick, if that makes sense. I don't know how well I actually explained that.
No, I get what you mean.
Yeah, that's smart. No, I actually agree with them. You know, it's if somebody's had their, somebody just keeps saying, you know, pick on the block, and they're waiting and waiting, there's a good chance, you know, and especially maybe, yeah, whether they've been sitting there for 6 hours waiting or they just made the selection, there is a good chance that they actually might sell for a little bit lower. And, you know, you can get a good deal. So, you know, if somebody's had their pick on the block for 5 hours, I'll just say, hey, what's up? Just to see if maybe they're going to sell low because they're so desperate. But
I think that's a great tip, is that it's certainly something that I do in all of my leagues, is as soon as anybody puts anything on the block or anybody's looking to move, whether it be a player, a draft pick, whatever, I will always drop a DM immediately and say, what are you looking for? What's the price? That kind of thing. Because I think that, you know, it could be that, as you said, Emerson, they're in that desperate situation to start with. Like, I really don't want this pick. I want to move back. And they'll give you a good deal. And, you know, you never know unless you ask the question. And you can sit there after the draft has been done and someone's like, does a trade, and you're like, oh my God, that's incredible value. Why would you do that? And it's like, well, did you ask the question? Did you inquire as to what the price was for that pick? And if you didn't, you've only got yourself to blame, kind of thing, because I think you need to always at least be asking that question. And is there, you talked, Emerson, about taking best player available. And I think this is something that perhaps people who are earlier in their dynasty career, shall we say, sometimes fall into a kind of a potential pitfall of trying to fill out, I'm trying to fill out my starting roster before I get to my bench. I know there's a certain approach that people will have in redraft with how many positions they're looking to appoint to, roster spots and things like that. Do you try and structure your roster in any way, or is it literally from 1 to pick 30, you're taking best player available no matter what?
I will, especially on those early couple round picks, if I might reach a little bit on an elite quarterback in a super flex league, if I can nab a Javonte Williams, a DeAndre Swift, one of those really young elite backs, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, I might reach a little bit over a wide receiver, just knowing that I'm going to be likely going wide receiver heavy on almost every pick after that. So yeah, I might, I tend to try to maybe try to lock up, at least if it's a super flex league, I try to maybe walk away with two quarterbacks in the first 3 rounds, and maybe, if I could snag an elite running back with that other pick, that's fantastic. But so then after that, though, I tend to draft the best player available. The only time I think that's not great is if you end up with a bunch of tight ends. Because then people aren't valuing the tight ends, and those things are not the tight ends are not coming off your roster. I've done that before. Leagues, I'm just like, all right, nobody's drafted tight ends. I'll have 6 tight ends on my roster. Those 6 tight ends, I think I still have 5 of them today.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And that comes back to what we were saying earlier, doesn't it? About every draft is a unique situation where just because you think certain things are the best player available, it might be that actually, yes, in a vacuum, they're the best player available, but in your league, they might not necessarily be. You touched on quarterback position there in Superflex. And I think that, I don't know if you guys would agree, every draft I'm doing, every startup I'm doing, if it's 1 QB, I'm basically just not interested. I think I'm in 2 1 QB leagues, and that's because they're sort of 4 or 5 years old and everything else is Superflex. So let's talk about the quarterback position in a Superflex league, Emerson. Do you have a minimum number that you must roster?
Well, I definitely want 2. I definitely want 2, but I'd like 3 or 4. That's fine. I don't like to invest 3 early picks on a quarterback. If I drafted too early, I tend to trust myself that I'm going to be starting those guys most of the time. And I'll probably fade it for, till the double-digit rounds, till maybe I could snag like a Daniel Jones in the 10th or 11th or something like that. But if I can start off with 2 great quarterbacks, whether it be, I love Matthew Stafford as one of my favorite 3rd-round picks, just a guy, just probably going to be rock solid for the next 3 or 4 years. Just, what you care about in your dynasty league this next 3 or 4 year window. And if I can grab, even a Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson at the end of the 1st round. Of course, you have the top tier quarterbacks at the first, but those are, that's my preferred strategy in a Superflex. But you're right, in a 1 quarterback, I tend to fade it. Although, it's becoming just like trading back. It's becoming very popular to not draft a quarterback in 1 quarterback league. So if Lamar, it doesn't happen often, but if Lamar Jackson or somebody like that is just tumbling down the draft board into the 5th, round range, all of a sudden that does become a value, though.
Yeah. And do you think this is something that I've toyed with, and I think that it's perhaps better in slightly bigger leagues, but I think I try to kind of dictate the draft sometimes by my approach at quarterbacks, and I think that if you do go 2 quarterbacks early, I think by grabbing that 3rd quarterback, if the value is there in the 3rd or the 4th round, you can sometimes force that panic. And I think that Liam's not in the way, because I think Liam agrees. But I think if you can kind of almost dictate a position in the draft, much like you used to be able to do it with running backs in redraft 1 QB league sort of 10 years ago. But if you can take 3, even 4 quarterbacks early, you create some massive panic. Liam, is that something you like to try and do?
Yeah, that's a massive thing that I say enjoy, purely because it normally gives me an advantage. It can backfire. There are times where it backfires, but if you're taking your QB3 as, say, a Zach Wilson or someone around that range, maybe 4th, 5th round, you'll put, and then say you do it just before a turn, then that creates a mass panic for those people on the turn. Even if they only have one quarterback, then they're looking to get their second quarterback before they all fly off, before the snake gets back to them. And that pushes higher end wide receivers, running backs, whatever position you're looking at, further down the draft board for you. And I absolutely love that value, or the tactic, purely for that reason. Is you grab a great value on most of the time, but you also end up pushing more value further down. And you can even combine that with something we've spoken about a lot, is trading back. Is if you push all that value down and then you can recoup more value by trading back, then you're still getting someone that you probably would have got, but because you forced this QB run or tight end run or wherever it may be, you've pushed more value at a different position further back, and you've actually gained just because you've made a trade and a pick.
I like I've certainly, sorry to interrupt you, but I like that strategy a lot. Like I said, I've done drafts where I've done 4 or 5 quarterbacks in a row, and it certainly does cause a panic. But then I don't like to keep too many assets on the bench though. So if I do that, I want to make a trade, and I have been burned a little bit on like Baker Mayfield and Carson Wentz in the 4th and 5th round in recent drafts. I would have said Tua, although he might be rebounding here. I'm not a Tua fan. I think one of you might be. No,
I'm definitely not.
No,
I'm on the fence. I think that he has
shot Liam on the fence.
I think he has the potential, but I'm not going to say that he's going to be the next QB.
He has vicious fans on Twitter. They will come after you. The Dolphins fans are angry.
Yeah, those Tua stands are big. I think it's really interesting you saying about that, Emerson, is because I'm the opposite. I think if I draft 5 or 6 quarterbacks sometimes in a startup, I'm holding those until I can get peak value. And to me, peak value is week 1, week 2, week 3 in the season, when people have got underperforming quarterbacks, maybe if there's an injury, because I think a lot of people look at their rosters in June, July and say, oh, I've got 2 elite quarterbacks, I'm fine. But actually, it's only when bye week start, it's only when an injury happens that suddenly 2 quarterbacks in a Superflex league isn't enough. I always say that I want a minimum of 4 starting quarterbacks in any Superflex league, because I think that you're 1 injury away from, catastrophe, and having that many, you can play the matchups and that kind of thing. So yeah, I try and hold those quarterbacks as long as possible, and almost try and hold the league hostage by trying to corner the market on starting quarterbacks. I think it's certainly a good way to go about it. Do you guys ever do the opposite and go, that risky 0 QB strategy in a startup? And if you did, is there anything you try to kind of recoup that potential waiting on that position?
It's tough. Every time I've done it, people like yourself try to hit the barrel for a quarterback, so I always find it's really, if you walk out of a Superflex startup with 1 quarterback, man, it is going to be tough to get that next one. You'll spend your whole summer sending on offers, and I just think it's so hard. Like you said, if you be prepared for the long haul, if you go a lot of quarterbacks early, and especially if you want to wait and fill out your lineup over a year or 2, that's great. But be prepared. Yeah, like you said, be prepared to wait for those right trades, because sometimes you'll be waiting a while. So like I said, I've had those rosters, and people, like you said, maybe they didn't value the quarterbacks properly, and it'll take them maybe a little bit of while to realize how valuable those quarterbacks are. So. So, it's a little bit risky always, but just some of my strategies at least.
I think if you go in 0 quarterbacks, you are, or 1 quarterback, how like very short amount of quarterbacks, I think you're basically admitting to the league that you are in a year 1 rebuild. I don't think you're ever going to compete with just 1 quarterback ever in a Superflex league, even if that 1 quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. But you're just not going to do it. And 2 quarterbacks maybe depend on the quarterbacks, but I still think that if you're doing that, you're essentially admitting to the league you're basically running for a rookie quarterback next year and trying to win in year 2, maybe. Three.
I'm not sitting here saying that I'd advocate ever coming out of a draft with anything less than 3, if not 4 quarterbacks. But what I do quite like, if I fancy trying to be a bit risky, is that I will wait on quarterback. I will compensate that by taking volume. And, if I can come out of a draft, maybe not taking a quarterback in the first 2, 3, maybe even 4 rounds, because the value's not there. But if I can come out with, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, and then combine them with Daniel Jones or Jameis Winston or Marcus Mariota that's got more upside, and then I can sort of just play the matchups between those 4 or 5 potentially bad quarterbacks, I think that sometimes that's a good way to build a very good championship winning roster where you've compensated waiting on a position with volume. And I think that that's the only way to kind of wait on QB. I think if you miss out on the elite QBs, you've just got to go volume. I don't think there's a way where you can come out of a draft with, Ryan Tannehill and Carson Wentz and feel anything but absolute horror.
It's exactly what I do with tight ends. Is if I'm not getting one of the top 5, I am coming out with volume. Maybe not 5 or 6 like you said earlier, Emerson, because they're never moving off your roster unless you, if you drop them. But if, for example, tight ends, if I'm coming out without one of those top 5, maybe 6 if you include Hawkinson, then I'm picking up a lot within the 15 to 25, 30 range, and seeing who hits and who I can put in every week, basically. So, Emerson, we talked about Superflex, which seems to be the new norm, especially across Dynasty Twitter. But there's a lot. Do you play in a lot of different formats? So we've spoken about 1 QB in Superflex, but for example, me and Rich play in a salary cap league. We've got 16 teamers. There's a league that I'm in called a Delayed Dynasty. Do you play in any special formats? And if you do, how did you approach those startups? How did you prep for them slightly differently? Do you change your approach? Or is it more you change your approach with the scoring and maybe the positional requirements?
Oh, well, yeah, I definitely, one of the most important things, one of the most important pieces of advice is definitely looking over the scoring, the formats that you're using, because I definitely change, whatever I'm doing, whether it be Dynasty, Best Ball, Redraft, salary cap league, it's definitely going to be a lot different strategy. So I definitely, I apply a different strategy each one. We I'm sure we could talk a whole show about, but I do a couple salary cap leagues, and that's definitely very interesting. Where in those, I don't necessarily take a different player value, but I definitely do. It's definitely a lot of effort in the draft. You got to pay it's interesting because some drafts where you might have a lot of money going early. There's some drafts where people are saving their money. You can get the best players early. Sometimes the money goes fast right out of the gate. So those are very interesting. Been doing a lot of underdog best ball. I know that's not Dynasty, but oh man, that's so much fun right now. I love going on there and
just rubbing it in because we can't get underdog in the UK. So
I can't even talk about it. You guys have a UK base. I'm sorry, guys.
It's all good. We get DraftKings. It's far inferior, but it's all we get.
But yeah, so I'm looking for some IDP leagues though. I haven't made that venture really. It's very nuanced over there. A lot of it depends on the scoring and everything. But I'm trying to get it where I have it like one of every different type of league. Trying to do a lot more auction leagues. So definitely trying to diversify. But my main go-to is I have I'm in 30 dynasty leagues and 25 23 of them, 24 of them are just straight up deep dynasty super flex leagues. That's my go-to. There's some 16 teamers in there too, which of course drives up the value of quarterback a lot. So. Of course, you definitely want to pay attention to the format.
I think for me, this is where it comes back to my player values piece, is that because I've got that value for every player, I can tweak things slightly to help almost create my rankings automatically based on the setup. So, for example, Liam, you mentioned that 16-team league that we've just done. It had, fairly ridiculous quarterback scoring in that it's 6 points per touchdown. It's 0.1 per passing first down, and QBs are going to score high, and it's 16-team superflex. So for me, I took all my values, I took all the quarterbacks, and I times their value by 1.5, which meant that the first 14 players in my rankings were all quarterbacks. But it's in that league, I can't remember if you remember, Liam, but I think there was 32 quarterbacks had gone in the first 3 rounds or something stupid. I've never seen a draft like it where quarterbacks went, but that's what you need to adjust to. There was a couple of people that tried to go 0 QB or wait on QB in that league, and basically they're at least a year, if not 2, away from competing because they've not got one quarterback, let alone 2.
Yeah, those people are at the end of the first round, so they're on that snake turn, and I don't think they really.
We can call out Tarek. It's fine. It was Tarek. he took CeeDee Lamb and John J. Swift at the 116 and the 201, and then by the time it got back to him in the 3rd round, there was literally no quarterbacks on the board.
That's a horrible spot to be in, though, just because he's going to have to reach really high on the quarterback, and then by the time it gets back to him, everyone else has got another one of the good running backs and wide receivers. So
it was third round reversal. He had Yeah, I think he ended. I want to say he took Kenny Pickett at 301, which when you're taking Kenny Pickett in the 3rd round, it's never particularly nice, is it?
That hurts. Oh. That's well done. I never have good luck when I wait on the quarterback, especially in a 16-team league. I'm in an interest. Okay, one league I forgot to mention. It's a 16-team league, but you have a partner and you are playing individual matchups each week. But then you can trade back and forth between your partner, and you can set the best optimal lineup between 2 teams. I could talk about the nuances, but there's 16 teams and it's a super flex. And I mean, that's what it was. I was drafting Sam Darnold over DeAndre Hopkins, 3 years ago. You know how that works out. But, like I said, it never works out to wait on the quarterback. Nobody, I think I've seen 1 quarterback traded in that league in 3 years. So they're hard to get.
That sounds interesting. In my spare time, because I'm sad, I've been looking at and trying to create new formats for redraft. I never thought about something along those lines in Dynasty. So one of the formats that I've thought of is more like a team base, so the league is split. And this is a little bit off topic, but the league is split into 2 teams, and then they can trade around and essentially basically work together to try and win as many individual matchups, and then their points get added together at the end. But I've never thought about that in a dynasty format. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and it's really hard to get a trade done. I'll say that, just because you have to get 4 people to agree on a trade, which is almost impossible. So it's really hard. It's not exactly a very active. It's fun. It's especially fun during the league because you're playing with lineups. You're waiting till 11:59 to send all your players to this side. It's really fun to tinker with the lineups and kind of play battle with that. But it is hard to execute a trade.
Are there any other funky formats that you've got, or are those the ones that you've told us so far?
I think those are the funky formats. I used to be like, why would I play in any of those funky formats? Dynasty, Superflex. That's me. But I definitely try to. Like I said, I'm trying to get a little bit of everything. I'm looking for an IDP league. I definitely don't want to go too heavy. I couldn't imagine drafting a full IDP league. No offensive starters. That seems brutal, but something with some light IDP in it.
Now, before you leave us, Emerson, and before we finish the show, we asked you to give us, the new segment, your Dynasty tip of the week. What have you got queued up for the listeners?
Well, I had to, and I guess I kind of peppered them throughout the show, really. Well, one would be, I think, especially if you're an active trader, I do take the best player available. Maybe unless unless you're stacking tight ends. I just think, you want to build your dynasty league like a stock portfolio. I'm always trying to create value. And I always think if you take who you think is going to have the best value for a 3-year window, and you keep building your lineup that way, you're going to be able to fill your lineup. Like I just traded for Derrick Henry for Christian Watson and a late 23 second. I always think those trades are around when you need them to get a running back you need to compete. And like we saw last year, Rashad Penny and Devin Singletary were the hero of the playoffs. The other one I would throw at you, if I said it too early as well, was the don't draft any 26-year-old running backs early or older. I'll steal, Rich, I'll steal one thing from DLF, their Dynasty Draft Guide, which you should all subscribe to and get. But I think that they said on their draft guide that not one running back older than 26 had cracked the top 6 in the last 3 years. And then only Mark Ingram and one other player had cracked the top 12 in the last 3 years as a running back 26 or older. So that's, the running back production comes from that 23 to 26 window. And, I've said this about Derrick Henry for the last 2 or 3 seasons, but I'm not coming off it now. I'll take the risk in redraft leagues. It's kind of risk it for the biscuit, but I'm not drafting those players in any dynasty leagues.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Bob.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks a bunch. Take it easy, okay?
Thanks, Emerson. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. So, guys, you can find Emerson at Dynasty_analyst on Twitter. All of his work is on the 5 Yard Rush website, tweeted out from at 5 Yard Dynasty if you want to take a look at his work and all the other great writers we have pumping out content for us there. And until next week, guys, have a great week. We'll see you then.